Alright, what's up guys? We're back with the old CA faceless style videos. So in this video, I wanted to show you guys how our new app, FaceIQ Labs, works. And the way we're going to do this today is by analyzing some of my subscribers who sent their photos in my school community. Now, if you want to be part of these rating videos, you can either upload your photos in my school, but I'll also open it up to everyone once I begin the Mogathon, quote unquote Mogathon. It's obviously kind of a meme, but you guys can submit your photos on my Discord in the submissions for Mogathon channel, which I'll link in the description below. So without further ado, let's see how the app works. Let's see how accurate it is, what kind of insight it gives on these faces. Now, before anyone says anything in the video, like pay attention in the first minute of the video, these assessments, these other pillars, angularity, dimorphism, features, and the overall rating, which is contingent on these three, is not accurate. Like, these are just stub values. The actual testing for these things, which we actually have completed, is on the admin side. So these are not actually representative of his angularity, his dimorphism, etc. So the only thing we're going to be looking at today is the facial harmony. And that's the first thing we're going to roll out with our initial launch of the app. And then as we go in the next weeks, we'll launch angularity, which is pretty extensive in the insight it gives you. And even more than this, we're adding far more features and dozens of features for this. Practically anything that has to do with your facial attractiveness, you'll be able to assess. And based on that, you'll get insight to have a roadmap on what you can do to progress, to increase your points. Points, it's like a game, but to increase your attractiveness, right? The cost, everything to do with that. It's going to be far more detailed than what you see on screen. What you see on screen is just like a placeholder for how the design should look, but it's going to be far more detailed than this. So yeah, let's analyze the facial harmony now, which has an immense amount of detail. It's incredible the amount of detail we put into this one assessment. And this is what, just 30% of what we plan to offer for this app? So the amount of detail you guys will get on your face is incredible. Like, it actually, it makes me really excited to see this come to fruition, because this is like, I don't know if you guys know the Avengers reference where Tony Stark was saying something to the effect of, I saw a suit around the world, or I see a suit around the world. Like, this is literally my vision. I see an app that can analyze sub-5s, chads, normies, and give all of them insight, all the same, not the same exact insight and the same rating, but you know what I mean. The exact same unbiased, objective level of insight that'll help everyone alike. This was my vision from the very beginning when I started with the Harmony app, and this is just like a super evolved version of that. So, sorry for delaying, let's get into the actual analysis. So the first thing you see when you generate your analysis, by the way, you have to map the features first, which I'll show you how it works by putting up on screen on the left here, like the interface for that. So you basically map your features, which is actually kind of fun, and then it'll output your analysis. And the first thing you'll see here is your strengths, which in his case, he has a long ramus. So based on different assessments, it'll tell you which features are strengths: ideal forehead width, ideal forehead slope, not overly sloped back, not overly upright or flat, refined nasal tip, well-contoured orbital region, so he seems to have a positive orbital vector, ideal jaw length in terms of his jaw height, related to his other proportions, well-positioned cheekbones, he seems to have higher set cheekbones, 10 out of 10 here, and some of the strengths don't have to always be ideal. Ideal represents the 10 out of 10. You have a perfect score here. But even if you stray a little bit outside of ideal, it can still be a strength, and it'll be represented as like a good value, which we'll see in the other faces. But in this case, he just seems to have mostly ideal values as his strengths. Now, in terms of areas of improvement, we can see that he has a slightly under-projected chin, given these assessments here being a little less than ideal, but it's a moderate flaw, so it's not something major or severe that you'd be able to visually discern to the same level as a severe flaw. Mandibular recession, so he doesn't have any severe flaws, in other words, which is really good. Rounder convex facial profile, he seems to have a lower facial convexity. Nothing crazy though. Insufficient eye tilt, his eyes could be a little bit more upturned, but again, it's not a huge deduction here. Long mid-face, narrow mouth, and we'll see all of these assessments as we get into the actual visuals and see how accurate or representative of these actual flaws they are, which they're very accurate. Given my thorough testing. I've been literally working on this like 16 hours a day, maybe more, because I've slept like 4 hours on average, and I've been doing nothing else besides working on this. So pretty much everything in my day, eating, The only thing I do that's separate from this is like going to the gym every now and then, but literally I've just been slaving on this. So overly round eye shape. So let's look at some of these flaws and how they actually manifest, right? So we can see his facial thirds here. Every time you scroll past one of the assessments, it'll just give you a quick visual. But if you want to look more in depth here, you can actually see the exact descriptions of each assessment. It'll tell you that it's ideal, balanced height enhances vertical proportions. It tells you about the ratio in case you're not familiar with it, but I'm sure most of you guys are probably familiar. Your score, the ideal range, and then the curves, which, by the way, we'll probably remove most of these. We'll see. I don't know if people are actually interested in different types of scoring curves, but the one we're using for these assessments that I think is most representative of facial attractiveness and the assessments comprising them are the decay curve, because the decay curve is pretty steep once you go outside of the ideal range. It's not a linear decay from when you go outside of the ideal range, if that makes sense. So we didn't make it too steep because otherwise people would be getting deducted like an insane amount of points. I mean, it'd be very difficult to get above 50 or 60% if the decay was too steep, but it's still more difficult than the previous system I created. It's a little bit more harsh, a little bit more difficult to get into the 80, 85 plus range. So you can see his facial thirds are actually ideal. They all sit within this blue range here. And that makes sense, like 31%, 34, 34.7. He has a little bit taller of a lower third. Now his overall face shape is a little bit outside of the ideal range. You can see here that it's about 1.3, which the ideal range we've kind of adjusted to be a little bit more forgiving, like in the 1.31 to 1.38 range, which is still not an overly narrow or overly long face shape. But his is slightly too narrow, just minor. It's pretty negligible. That's why he got a 9.6, I believe, from 9.2. Good jaw width. You can see here, lower third proportion, pretty harmonious. That's the upper portion of his jaw relative to the lower. His eye spacing is a little bit close set here. You can see that he gets deducted maybe like 20, 25% of the points or so from 40. So yeah, like 26, 27%. It could be a little bit more wide set in terms of eye spacing. One eye apart test is a little bit outside of ideal, but nothing crazy. Mouth width to nose width indicates that his mouth is a little bit on the narrower side, which maybe he has some mouth asymmetry too, or I could have just mapped this wrong, but it seems that the left portion of his mouth is a little bit higher than the right, or he could be making a facial gesture, so either or. I mean, we're going to make it very clear. We're going to signpost in this app and make it very clear that the photos you upload matter. They matter a lot. So if you get inaccurate assessments, it's not actually the fault of the rating app. Obviously, I'm not saying the scoring system itself is perfect, but the actual, in terms of the values and the insight you'll get from the assessments, that's 100% objective and accurate. But the photos you input do matter. So definitely try to take the best, most like clinical photos you can, like 6 feet away from your camera, minimize lens distortion, high quality, etc. And we're going to make a guide, like a video, a short, brief video showing you guys how to do that. Chin to fill trim is a bit on the narrower side. You can see his chin is a little bit short. So that makes sense. He gets deducted a decent amount of points here, like around 12 points. Since it's not too far from ideal, but it's still kind of noticeable. Mid-face looks in the ideal range, 0.95. It's good, especially with his closer set eyes. It's actually good that his mid-face isn't overly elongated. Now his eye tilt could be a little bit higher. It's about 3 degrees, on average 3.2. So it's below the ideal range, resulting in insufficient positive tilt, giving him a score of 7.2, which deducts a good amount of points from 30 points. So you can see just how steep the curve is, because that's actually representative of how you want to have the ideal, like it's called coinophilia, averageness range, the ideal harmonious range. And as soon as you stray from that, it starts to get pretty noticeable and severe in terms of deduction. Jaw frontal angle looks pretty ideal. He has a good tapering, good shape to his jawline. And lower lip to upper lip. His upper lip could be a little bit fuller, at least related to his lower lip. So not a big flaw though, 7.8 score. And by the way, these scores, again, they don't represent the actual point values in our system. So you can see here that, we assigned a certain point value there, but this is the standardized score. So it's standardized to be out of 10. Eye aspect ratio, a little bit on the lower side, which means his eyes are a bit rounder than ideal. not as narrow or hunter-like. But again, it's nothing crazy, although it is here a little bit on the lower end, but it's not like a severe flaw. As we saw, it didn't come up on the severe flaws. Eyebrow tilt, actually he has a negative eyebrow tilt here and slightly positive here, which kind of balance out. So I'd say he has a neutral eyebrow tilt. He has flat eyebrows overall. By the way, this doesn't mean that his eyebrows here are actually like negative, like in the absolute sense. It depends on both of them together, which he has flat eyebrows. And that does take away a decent amount of points from him. Neck width is ideal. He doesn't have an overly narrow neck. High cheekbones. You can see that they sit very close to his eyes. And so forth. And we're going to add probably a few more assessments about the ear protrusion and so forth. But now let's move on to the side profile before we go to another face. I think I'll do one more face for this video, but I'll definitely upload more videos with this because it just makes it so much easier. Like, this was the main deterrent for me doing celebrity analysis and face rating analysis on subscribers, is it just takes a lot of time to sit there and do the math. It literally takes like an hour to do the math on every single face and make sure it's accurate. But with this, boom, like you're done in minutes or even less if you're proficient at mapping the face. And it just gives you all the insight, like literally, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic, like 3+ hours of insight that I don't think even a surgeon could give you. Now, even me, myself, I'm susceptible to miss things. I'm fallible. But once you implement like an objective system with guides and so forth, like this will give you hours, dozens of hours of insight and be super accurate to the level like you can't even have from a person doing this kind of analysis. So it's really beneficial. It'll make it way easier to do celebrity rating videos. And we're going to implement like some interesting affiliate system as well, where you guys can take part in that. So more info on that coming in the future. But so his brow ridge is not overly sloped back, good nasofrontal angle, a little bit more on the obtuse side, but it's nothing crazy. That literally just outside of the ideal range, barely deducting. Good nasal tip angle. His nasolabial angle is not too upturned, not too droopy. Now his facial convexity is a bit on the more rounded convex side, which could indicate a tiny bit of mandibular recession. Like maybe his jaw could be a little bit more projected over here, but it's nothing crazy. You see that he gets deducted like maybe 2/3 of the points, so it's nothing crazy. Same with the facial convexity of the nasion, which is basically an identical assessment, but it reduces the confounding variable of the brow ridge, which could impact like the indication on your jaw projection. So that's why we have a bunch of assessments to give you guys a holistic view of your face. Total facial convexity, same thing. And because all his convexity assessments, like his total, his glabella, and his nasion convexity, they're all basically trending in the same direction, we can all indicate that he has probably some type of mandibular, tiny bit of mandibular recession, barely, like moderate to minor, indicated by the severity of his flaw. So that's pretty good, because sometimes a low total facial convexity could be due to an over-projected nose, but that's not the case for him because his other facial convexity assessments without the nose display the same thing, if that makes sense. Good nasal projection, not overly projected or less projected than ideal, just like what I said. Now his nasal width to height ratio is a bit on the higher side, primarily because the distance from his nose base, alar base, to his eyes is a bit compact, which is good. I mean, he has a compact midface, but his nose, by the way, I might have mapped this a little bit. You know, this is probably actually over here, so we could say it's like 0.95 or something, which is definitely not as severe. That would be like over here. So he wouldn't get deducted as much, actually. But the same principle applies, that his nose, it's kind of like moderate projection. It's not less projected than ideal. It's not overly projected either, but his midface is actually kind of compact. So all these things play into one another. His lip assessments are decent. They're not perfect. He has a bit too much distance between this line and his upper lip here. The lower lip is more reasonable. The H line looks pretty close to ideal. It is ideal, in fact. Literally, the lower lip pretty much meets the line. And we adjust all these for ethnic variation as well. All right, so upper lip S line, pretty good as well. A little bit outside ideal range. There's a bit of distance here, but still pretty good. And birthstone line looks ideal here. A little bit of protrusion past the line. Nasomental angle is a bit outside of the ideal range. Again, this indicates the same thing as his convexities, which is a bit under projected of a mandible, since if his chin was like projected like literally right here, the angle would be ideal, 125 degrees, it'd be more obtuse. So yeah, we can pretty safely say he has a tiny bit of like a minor to moderate mandibular recession. Nasofacial angle looks good, so not all assessments will indicate like mandibular recession, so that's why we have a culmination of them. Gonale angle looks a bit flat here, but I do think I mapped it correctly. It seems to emulate the contour of his jawline, so that's pretty good. But again, that's like barely outside of the ideal range, literally 0.6 outside. So nothing too noteworthy here. Mentolabial angle is a bit outside of ideal, I think. Yeah, a tiny bit. Which probably is due to his chin. I don't think his lips look that protruded, so his chin could be a little bit more protruded. Good gonion growth, and he's not recessed. His chin seems to pretty much be right on the line, or 0.4 millimeters in front of the line. So I wouldn't say he has recession via this assessment, but the other ones would indicate that. And orbital vector looks positive. You can see his eye here. I know it's kind of low resolution, but his corneal apex, the point of his eye here, sits a little bit behind the foremost point of his orbital region. So pretty good. And overall, he scored 69.4%, which, by the way, this guy's a good friend of mine, and I do rate him around the overall, like encompassing dimorphism, angularity, so forth. I rate him around a 6.5. So I think this is pretty accurate. I think this is where he would put himself as well. Pretty good, actually. Now let's move on to another face, right? So this guy also uploaded his photos into my school community, and he wanted some insight, so we're going to give him some pretty thorough insight, probably more than he expected, with this analysis. Now, I don't think this is an ideal photo, so I'll be fair, of course. I think this is a selfie, but it doesn't look too distorted, so we'll go with what we were given. So here you can see that he has good facial convexity. His face doesn't look overly rounded or flat. Good jaw width. Ideal ramus length. He has a pretty long ramus, actually. Ideal forehead width. I mean, I can't really see his forehead, so I just kind of mapped it how I subjectively thought I should, but I don't know. Maybe his forehead ends over here or maybe over here, but so we'll kind of ignore that. Ideal forehead slope. Doesn't have an overly drawn back forehead or flat. Balanced eye shape. That has to do with whether his eyes are too narrow or round, and he seems to have a good eye shape in that respect. Eyebrow tilt, orbital region, jaw length, mid-face width, well-positioned cheekbones. You can see they actually sit pretty high there. And now we'll see his photos when I scroll down to these specific assessments, but you can see his cheekbones are actually very high. They seem to be a strong point. Good cheekbone angularity. Now in terms of his flaws, he has one severe flaw, which is insufficient eye tilt. And we can see that he has negative canthal tilt. I'll show you guys that. His mandible is a bit recessed. Round neck region, submental angle here. Soft and feminized brow ridge, which, again, that has to do with the severity, so it's not like overly feminized, but it's a moderate flaw. His nasofrontal angle is a little bit high. His lips are kind of protruded. They're very, they don't look too thin in the front, but they're protruded. So there's a difference between like lip fullness in terms of, usually they're correlated, so I'm not saying they're totally separate, but the lips could be like full in the vertical sense, but like protruded or not protruded in the sagittal plane, like going forwardly. So there's that, and long face shape, thin neck, minor flaw. So let's look at some of these flaws. You can see that his top third is his longest third, which is a flaw for sure. And then his total facial width to height ratio is a bit on the higher side, nothing extreme, a bit of a longer face shape, which probably has to do with distortion, lens distortion. I guarantee you if he had took a better photo, this would probably be in the ideal range. Lower third proportion, this one is a flaw. And why is it a flaw? He has kind of a droopier nasal tip. So this portion of his jaw is a bit on the shorter side, the upper portion. And this has to do with his growth pattern of his jaw, which we'll also see reflected in his other assessments, that he seems to have what's called a hyperdivergent growth pattern, where the jaw grows at a steeper downward angle. And that's reflected usually in a taller chin, taller lower third, or any combination of, like, it's not always strictly one assessment. That's why you need to have the whole picture, which that's what I'm here for. That's why I built the app, to have that in mind. So his eye spacing is actually very good. Even his one eye apart test is not too bad, pretty reasonable. Mouth width to nose width looks pretty much ideal, like it's 0.01 away from ideal. He has a little bit narrow over mouth. He could have a bit wider of a mouth, but it's nothing extreme. Perfect mid-face ratio. And now this is his biggest flaw, which is his canthal tilt, which is not actually strictly negative, but the value is pretty neutral. It's about 1 degree. And now one thing that contributes to the droopiness of his eyes is not only the tilt, the value, but it's also the shape, the rotational symmetry, the ptosis of his eyes, which is the droopiness of his eyes. It's not too severe, but you can see a bit of sagging in the lower lid. Tiny bit of scleral show over here. So yeah, his eyes, I think, are one of his larger flaws. Ipsilateral alar angle is good. The width, the harmony of the interior midface, which is this part here, just the middle part of the midface. You can see that his upper lip is kind of thin compared to his lower lip. Definitely a flaw there. Like I said, he has a good eye aspect ratio, good eye width to height ratio. Eyebrow tilt looks pretty good. Neck width a little bit thinner than ideal. See 86% here. High cheekbones, like I noted, they sit pretty high, close to his eyes. And yeah, so let's move on to the side profile here. The brow ridge, you can see that the top of his forehead is a bit sloped back, but so while the inclination of his forehead is good, I do think this is probably not the most ideal forehead shape, but it's such a minor, I'm nitpicking, to be honest. Nasofrontal angle is a bit on the higher side. Nasolabial angle looks pretty decent, although I maybe could have mapped this better. Yeah, I could probably have mapped this better over here, but irrespective, I think this would have been ideal. So no comment there. Facial convexity looks good. It's definitely on the more flat side, but it's still ideal. There's nothing wrong with his facial convexity. Total facial convexity, exact same thing. Nasal projection is really low. And nasal projection not only has to do with the actual protrusion of your nose, which it does calculate for sure, but it also has to do with the shape of it. Like if the nasal bridge here, the dorsum, is too bulbous or protruded, it'll definitely mess up your measurement. So this could indicate either of two things, which is an overly, in his case, which could be a really unprotruded nose, which I don't think is the case for him. His nose protrusion is normal. Or it could indicate some kind of flaw in his nose shape. You can see via this assessment that his nose protrusion is pretty normal, actually seems to be on the higher end compared to his nose height. Now his lip assessments do not look good at all, which you can see there's way too much distance between this line and the upper lip, which there have been many studies done on these lip assessments. They're actually a very reliable indicator of lip attractiveness and lip harmony. And one of the least attractive positions is when the lips are overly protruded. Usually people actually prefer even a more slightly protruded position. Now there's an ideal, of course, but even the more slightly protruded position tends to be more attractive than overly protruded. His H-line looks good though, pretty close. H-line, S-line, again, overly protruded, too much distance. Burstone line, again, overly protruded. His lips should actually pass the line a bit in Caucasians. Nasomental angle is a bit outside of ideal. Now his nasofacial angle here is a bit more acute than ideal, which it could be due to his nose shape or the fact that his chin could be a little bit more set back here. But in this case, obviously, he probably should have a little bit more forward growth of his entire jaw. So the upper jaw and the lower jaw. But if we just had to critique his position here, the indication would be that his lower jaw should be a little bit more set back. But that's not actually true. Gonile angle is a bit more acute than ideal. You can see that's a little bit more flat, which is very interesting since he has a steeper jaw shape with a flatter gonile angle. And his mandibular plane angle actually is pretty ideal as well. So it's very interesting how different face shapes can indicate different flaws, which in his case, we looked at the front profile and his jaw frontal angle was overly steep. Usually a steep angle is, especially a longer chin, is indicated by like a higher mandibular plane angle, but in this case it's not. He has severe recession relative to the Frankfurt plane, which the Frankfurt plane would be like a line cut across here from his ear to his orbital region here. And you can see that he has severe recession here via this assessment. So while some of his other assessments didn't flag this, this one did. And he seems to have a tiny bit of a negative orbital vector, a little bit of hollowing underneath his eyes. So overall, he got a score of 51.8%, which is fairly average. It's a little bit actually below average in terms of harmony. And the reason the 50th percentile is not a 5 out of 10 flat is because technically overall attractiveness is a bit more rare and sits around that 5 out of 10 mark, because overall attractiveness requires pulling together like all these components and having them just fit together perfectly in a face, like angularity, eyebrow density. But harmony is just one aspect of someone's face. It's like if I know obviously this is less extreme of an example, but like if we went through how someone would score on dimorphism, or how would someone score on eyebrow density, like obviously it wouldn't be that rare. It wouldn't be as rare to have a good eyebrow density or a dimorphic face as it would be to have an overall attractive face. There's plenty of people with good eyebrow density, good dimorphism that aren't that attractive. The same applies to harmony, although harmony is actually probably way more rare overall than like an individual feature like eyebrow density, just because it literally includes all of these assessments. So harmony is rare. It's not as rare as the overall attractiveness. That's why the average sits around like a 5.7, 5.8 in our system here. So he's around average, slightly below average in terms of harmony. Now, with that said, guys, let me just do like a face we all know, which is Matt Bomer. And Matt Bomer here got 88%, which if we reference some of the past videos I've done on him, again, this is not the exact same system. This system is refined, it's tuned, different curve, a little bit more harsh, a little bit harsher, more assessments, different weightings, it's just more precise, more precision, more features, more everything. So it's not going to be the exact same, but Matt Bomer usually gets in that 85 to 90 something range. So this seems very accurate for him in these photos. So Matt Bomer gets an 8.8. Now in terms of his key strengths, you can see 22 strengths listed here, which is a lot. Balanced nasal profile, orbital region, jaw length, and only a few flaws, 7 flaws here, which are his brow region, definitely not as masculinized. Thin upper lip, that's true. Protruded upper lip, that's true, given his chin is a little bit more protruded than ideal here. And thin lower lip, short middle third, which is definitely true here, a little bit shorter of a middle third. Now, one guy I actually used to test is the good old Mauger, black pill Mauger Krisick, which I don't know why I just clicked reanalyze, I already did this, but Krisick got 90%, which is really, really high. 91% front, 88% side. And in terms of his strengths, 21 key strengths, harmonious facial convexity, ideal ramus length, like just a whole slew of strengths here. And areas of improvement, also 7. Moderate flaw, wide mouth, overprojected chin, which he does have a bit of a projected chin. What's indicating that? His lip assessments and the nasofacial and mental angle, which he could have a tiny bit less projected of a chin and still, I think, retain the rest of his harmony. He has chin to philtrum ratio that's too low, I believe. Longer philtrum. Thin upper lip, definitely true. And nasal tip. We could look at the chin to philtrum ratio here. Yeah, 1.86. So he has a longer philtrum for sure, which deducts. This is the old system, by the way, the tier score, which you can see the tier score is not as accurate as ideal. There are better ways of quantifying the scoring. The tier score just has steep drop-offs. You want to have more of like a smooth curve that deducts as you go. Now, if you guys want to sign up for the early access, I did leave a link in the description, so feel free to do that if you guys want. And yeah, we'll definitely be launching very, very soon for the earliest features. I mean, definitely I would anticipate in the next week or two, but we'll see. Now, even the free detail we'll give out, we're going to be pretty generous with that because I know you guys want to analyze your ratios and whatnot. Even the free detail we'll give out, which will definitely improve over time as we add more, we'll give more. Um, Even that completely mogs UMax into oblivion. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.